Hi there, and welcome to Flip the Script Season 3 in the Weeds, Episode 12, The One Thing, I feel like Curly in the City Slickers movie, the one thing you need in order to gain your buyer's trust. If you do me a favor, if you go ahead and download the deck, you can do that by going to flipthescript.co, click on Free Sales Training Hub on the left-hand side, navigate down to Season 3, and then click on episode 12. It's free. All you'll need is an email to download the deck. And once you've done that, let's go ahead and jump on in. So let's start with an agenda. These are the things that we're going to go into. So essentially the one thing that you need, not to blow the entire surprise ending, but the one thing that you need to know your buyer's trust is you need to know them. So we're going to go into the 6 different ways that you can know them. So number 1, knowing your buyer according to their metrics. Number 2, knowing your buyer according to their problems and challenges. Number 3, knowing your buyer according to what's relevant to them statically. Number 4, how to know your buyer in terms of what's going on with them in relationship to you. Knowing your buyer in terms of what's going on with them not in relation to you, and knowing your buyer for your buyer. So that we're going to go into a lot of how to know your buyer. So what's the one thing that we need to gain our buyer's trust? Ta-da! You need to know who they are. Knowing your buyer is at the crux of any good seller. Knowing them in terms of comprehensively what can make a difference for them is where you're going to gain that trust. So let's go into number 1, how to know your buyer according to your metrics. So there are 3 types of metrics that I'm thinking about whenever I'm thinking about my buyer in general. And every buyer persona will have these 3. So you have leading indicators, leaning indicators, and lagging indicators. A leading indicator, simply put, is an input. So this is something that's typically very difficult to measure, but is going to be predictive of, are they going to reach the outcome that they're looking to achieve? So for example, if you were to go into SDR work, that what you would change about your inputs to drive more booked meetings as your output would be email quality. Are you sending email? Are you making cold calls? What time are you making them? How many are you making of them? But these are essentially going to be inputs that are independent of any other indicator, and they're hard to define. They're hard to typically measure, but they are going to predict the likelihood, and these are what you change to get more of your output goal. So these are usually what people focus on, oddly enough. So this is, for instance, people think about what's the right email quality to send, or what's the right subject line, or should I send it, at this certain time, or should I make cold calls? Are those more effective than emails? But these are going to be what people think about whenever they're trying to drive their lagging indicator outcome. The second type of indicator, well, let's go lagging. That's easier. Lagging indicator is going to be an indicator of success that happens after an event that basically is just what your buyer is metriced on. So for instance, this is going to be their KPI. Very simple. For sales reps, it's going to be, quota attainment or close 1 ACV. For an SDR, it would be booked meetings. For a marketer, typically it'd be MQLs. For HR professional, it'd be ENPS score or churn. For sales enablement, it would be time to first deal or time selling. But what is the metric, a quantitative output that they look to as the answer to a question? So a great example of this is when you have 2 baseball teams that are playing one another, then typically who's the better team is metriced by who scores more runs in the course of 9 innings, if there's no overtime. So the lagging indicator is whatever your buyer is metriced on. If you don't know these about your buyer, this is a great place to start. So I would want to know, what is the win that they're trying to drive, so I know what their mindset is behind it. So we've got a leading indicator that's an input. We've got a lagging indicator that's an output. And this is dependent on other indicators. So the leading indicator wasn't. However, what's more key about a lagging indicator is you can optimize for it in isolation, whereas a leading indicator, you cannot. So for instance, if I think about only email quality as a leading indicator and only focus on that, I would sacrifice email quantity because I'm optimizing for it in isolation, which would be pretty dangerous. So I would only optimize for a lagging indicator in isolation. You've got one in the middle. I'm not going to spend much time here. It's a pretty confusing principle, full disclosure. But in the middle, you have what's called a leaning indicator or a coincidental indicator. So a leaning indicator is going to be share with a lagging indicator that it's dependent on a leading indicator, but it's going to share with a leading indicator that you cannot optimize for it in isolation. And it is just a real-time example or metric that shows you that you are on the right or wrong path, but is not the ultimate goal. So a great example of this would be email open rates. It's not what you're optimizing for. You can't pay your rent in email open rates, but it's a good metric that you're on the right path. Another example could be reply rates to emails. Again, the type of reply is going to predicate the outcome and the lagging indicator of are you booking more meetings, but it's a good time metric that you're on the right path. So here's a chart to understand what they are. So you have leading and leaning. You cannot optimize for them in isolation. And leaning and lagging, they're both dependent on another indicator. So leading indicator, you can't optimize for an isolation, but it is independent of any other indicator. A lagging indicator, it's dependent on a leading indicator, but you can optimize for it in isolation. This is just your overall metric. And a leading indicator, you cannot optimize for it in isolation, and it's also dependent on another indicator. So point being, I would want to know what these are for my buyer. Quick way to do it, if you say like, well, Becc, I don't know my leading indicators. I don't know what my buyer's KPI'd on. No problem. I'd go stop this video, go to Google right now, pull up your buyer personas and just say CFO KPIs or data or network security analyst KPIs. And you'll see a litany of articles. So I've done this with multiple different buyer personas, and it took me about 15 minutes to do 6 separate buyer personas that I had never worked with before. Whole bunch of articles on all kinds of KPIs that they're metriced on. So that would be the first step. The second thing you need to know about your buyers in terms of earning their trust is the type of problems and struggles that they commonly run into in their day-to-day. So to discuss this, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the wonderful Keenan, who wrote a book called Gap Selling. And what Keenan understood that was truly groundbreaking from my perspective is that people don't necessarily buy on pain, they buy on problem. And the difference being, all pains are not problems, and all problems are not pains. A problem is something that you're going to solve or solve for, whereas a pain is just something that is negative that's occurring to you. So a great example is of something that's a pain but is not a problem is it's really annoying that my phone loses charge very quickly. Now, it's not a problem, meaning I'm not solving for it because it's good enough as is. I haven't run into enough negative impacts. So a pain that I'm having is just an annoyance, but it's not something I want to solve for. So in his book, Gap Selling, Keenan goes into the 4 types of things within a current state that essentially people are looking to solve based on. So the first type here is called a technical problem. A technical problem, simply put, is just a problem with a tool or a process. And this is where salespeople usually live, breathe, eat, and die, is selling to technical problems. So a great example that I put up here, or the example he uses in his book, is that an alarm clock is broken. Or a common example I hear is SDRs are spending too much time on their to research their prospects in terms of personalizing their emails and doing outreach. The second type of problem is a business problem. And a business problem is just a result or the outcome of the technical problem. So in this example, the technical problem was my alarm clock's broken. And the business problem is I'm late to work, or I've been late to work 8 times for the last 2 months because of it. Or in the other example that I gave, my SDRs are spending too much time on research, a long time researching my prospects. And the business problem, the resultant problem from that is they've seen that they're able to send 30 less emails per day than they were, and they're not hitting their activity metrics and metrics for the quarter in terms of booked meetings because of it. So the business problem is what is happening as a result of the technical problem. A business impact is going to be, how is that technical problem and business problem currently impacting or going to negatively impact the person who's the prospect or the organization that they're a part of. So in this example, my alarm clock's broken. I'm late to work because I've been late to work over the last couple of months 8 times. And the business impact is if I don't get to work, if I'm late to work one more time, they're going to fire me. Or in the former example of my SDRs are spending too much time on outreach, on research. And so their activity metric has spiked down and they aren't hitting their meeting goal because of it. And the business impact is I'm going to be let go as an SDR leader if I can't find a way to lower the amount of time they're spending on research and increase the amount of quota that they're able to achieve. So again, a business impact is going to be what happens to that person or what happens to that organization as a result of the technical problem and business problem if they continue to persist and they cannot solve them. And then the last one's going to be a root cause. A root cause, simply put, is going to be the immediate cause of the technical problem. So this could be the 2 wires are crossed inside of the alarm clock, or maybe the cause of the SDR spending too much time on research is they're doing a very manual process of going to the prospect on LinkedIn and going through every single one of the buckets. But essentially, it's what's pointing to or what's causing the technical problem. So technical problem is just in review, a problem with the tool or process. Business problem is the result of that technical problem. A business impact is what happens to that person or that organ specific if the problem continues to happen, what's currently negatively impacting them, or what will impact them in the future if they don't solve the problem. And then the root cause is what's causing the technical problem. So point being, once I know my metrics for my buyer, the second thing I would want to know is what are their common business problems that they're running into? What are the things that are commonly a struggle for them in their day-to-day that's enough of a struggle that they're trying to solve for it very consistently? So Keenan goes into his book that typically an organization is going to have anywhere from 3 to 5 business problems. There's quite an infinite amount of technical problems and business impacts that can be revolving around that. But the business problems, I would want to know what are the common problems for my buyer so I know what common problems they're running into. So great example is a common problem for the SDR role is they don't know what type of emails will drive conversion. So their conversion can be anywhere from on the very high end of response rates of 5%, but usually I'm seeing them hover around 1% or sub 1% on outbound. So the business problem is it's really hard to book outbound. So they're constantly wondering about what's the perfect email to send. So I would want to know those for my buyer so I can talk to them with more relevance. So if I'm going to trust someone, trust comes down to the definition of, do I have a firm belief that someone is telling the truth? Do I have a firm belief in someone's ability? Do I have a firm belief in someone's reliability to deliver what they said they're going to do? Or the firm belief in a strength of something? So when our buyers trust us, they're not just trusting that we're telling the truth. They're also trusting that we have an ability that they don't possess and that we have the reliability that we can deliver what we said that we're going to deliver. So these types of problems, to know that you can trust someone or to have that firm belief, the second piece of the puzzle would be knowing them in terms of what are the common problems they run into. So when you're speaking to them, they have that level of trust in you or confidence in you that you're able to deliver. The third thing that I would want to know about my buyer is what's relevant to my buyer statically. So for relevance, I'm going to defer to the definition on Google, which is it's closely connected or appropriate to someone in terms of a segmented group. So this is one to many. So relevance, anytime that you can send a message to Daniel, and you can also send it to Keenan, that makes it relevance. So it means that it's appropriate to a certain group of people based on a common premise. So core static relevance would be the type of relevance I'm talking about here. And what I mean by that is something that is static in terms of the person or the organization that they're a part of, and that you can segment the how appropriate something is according to one of these premises. So there's only really 5 that I have that come to mind here. If you want to know more of these, if you go into written section on the website, under the 6 buckets of personalization asset, I go into all of these, but essentially buyer persona, company segment, meaning what's the employee band? Is it SMB, mid-market, general business, enterprise, or strategic? The industry vertical, the market geos, and the tech stack. But again, what is relevant, meaning what would impact my buyer according to, let's say that I'm selling to a sales leader that is sitting within APAC versus a sales leader that's sitting within EMEA versus a sales leader that's sitting within the US. So I'm going to know there's a certain amount of things that are going to shift based on those 3 in my example. So for instance, in EMEA, for instance, most sales professionals value personalization. They just want to find a way to speed that process up. In the US, Americans don't value personalization normally. They want to get out as many emails as they can, but they struggle with, how do I make this message quality? In APAC, for instance, one of the things that they run into quite frequently over there is they don't, in most countries, view LinkedIn as a business platform. They're not on LinkedIn or don't have a heavy presence, but they rather view Facebook as a business platform. So in one case scenario, I'm thinking about when I'm talking to a VP of sales, or their outreach is very heavy in terms of the apologies that they include up front, or one of the channels that they pursue very heavily is network meetings and luncheon meetings to build a long-term relationship with their buyer. So if I'm speaking to a VP of sales in the US, or I'm speaking to a VP of sales based in EMEA, in one case scenario, I'm going to take for context that I know by default we probably don't have to hit on the topic of personalization. They probably already convinced of that. What they need ideas and strategies of how to do is how to add some element of scale to replicate and speed that up. Now, if it's a VP of sales within the US, I'm going to think culturally for this market geo, that they typically are going to value scale, meaning the quality of outreach, but I'm going to need to hit heavily upon the personalization, the open rates, the response rates, because they're probably much lower because you're going templates only. So point number 3, I would know according to these 5 static materials, what is relevant to my buyer in terms of which one they are for each one of these. The 4th one is knowing what's going on with my buyer in relationship to my company. So this is going to be any kind of trigger-based relevance or movement-based relevance. So again, relevance being defined as it's one to many, but this type of relevance, whereas we had static before, this one is based on movement. So there are really 3 types, technically 4 types of movement someone could take. If you want to know more, if you go to the written section on the Flip the Script website and download the comprehensive encyclopedia of sales plays, the first type of movement someone could take in relationship to my company is going to be inbound, meaning the movement was they became a hand raiser. They asked to see my product or take a look at evaluating my services. So there's only really 2 examples of this within the encyclopedia if you check it out there, but people who request a demo or people who come in through a chat box on your website. The second type of trigger action they could take is what I would call postbound. So postbound is a non-hand-raising marketing action that someone took. So the movement that they made was they made some type of action in relationship to your marketing team, but it was not raising their hand to take a demo or evaluate your product. So there are a number of different examples of these. If you, can even read this. I hope that the deck's in front of you, but there's 30 different examples. People who downloaded content, attended a webinar, got a freemium account, free trial, blog subscribers, newsletter subscribers, people who open your emails from marketing aggressively. But essentially this type of trigger that I would know about my buyer is, are they taking any kind of movement in relationship to my company? So are they opening a lot of content? Are they opening a lot or attending a lot of my webinars, so that I can know that for them as context? Because I know that now I know they likely know some level of information about me or my company. The third type of movement that someone could make in relationship to you is bridge bound. So bridge bound has 5 different categories underneath it, only a couple that apply to your company. The first type would be bridge bound based on history. So what I mean by bridge bound is a way that your company, your prospect's company or your prospect made a movement, but the movement was not in relationship to your marketing team. So bridge bound based on history is they made some type of movement based on a history, a pre-existing history with you. So there's a number of different plays in here. They requested a demo but didn't schedule one. They agreed to a demo but then no-showed. They people who came into the chat on your website but then abandoned the chat before they asked for anything. People who demoed in the past and then ghosted or went dark. They went with a competitor up on renewal. But essentially, I would want to know if they have history with me and my company, which, keep in mind, this is very 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Meaning usually what I'm going to find is people are trying to go outbound, but the majority of their book has done something in relationship to their marketing team, or they requested a demo 3 months ago, but they didn't actually schedule one. So this can be a very big category. And again, this is some type of movement that they took with you or your company. Bridge bound based on relationship is going to be a category of they have some type of relationship with someone at your company or you in specific. This is a very meaty category. It's probably the biggest category that I have. 39 plays in here, but they have some type of relationship with they share a common VC with you. They have some type of relationship with your customers. Maybe they have some type of relationship with your C-suite. They engage with the C-suite's personal page. Some type of relationship with employees of your company, your advisors, board members, customer advisors, so on and so forth. But there are 39 plays in here of I would want to see, do they have some type of relationship with someone with me at my company so I can use that for context. So again, this is going to be a start of how do I get to know my buyer a little bit more. So I would not be scared if you don't know any of this about your buyer. There's never a better time to start than now. So I'd start with knowing their metrics and then their problems. And then I would bridge into, no pun intended, can I know anything that's happened with them in relationship to my company that can help me clue me in as to context of, do they know my company or do they not know my company? And what do they know about my company and what's the context there? Bridge bound based on their likely in market. This is another category where they are likely in market based on a trigger that you've seen. Number of different plays in here, but for instance, they just recently purchased an adjacent vendor, so they, for instance, they purchased a wonderful tool like Outreach. And now I know that they might be looking for ways of how to leverage Outreach with the best playbook. And so I might want to talk to someone if they just bought Outreach, for instance, or time-based sequences. Maybe there's an annual event like taxes. And so you are some kind of tax vendor that helps people solve a problem according to taxes. So according to that event happening every April of every year, every February, I would want to run some type of sequence or talk to someone based on is a likely premise that they are in market. So this is something to keep in mind. And that is going to be it for people or for knowing the triggers or things that are going on with your buyer that are in relationship to your company. So I now want to pivot to how do I know what's going on with my buyer not in relationship to my company, the things that are happening there. So the first one is bridge bound based on symptoms and signs, pains and problems. So this is going to be a category that's very, very meaty. And you'll notice I included some of Keenan's terms in here. But how can I identify buyers that are they are showing some type of sign or symptom that they have a problem that they need to solve for? So a great example of this, for instance, is they have an overt negative output. So a great example of this would be, I solve for pipeline and quota attainment with pipeline, the amount of meetings that a company has and how to acquire that through a lot of different process and training. So if I wanted a good cohort of people who are likely running into some type of problem there, I could use as an overt output, a negative output, I could search all of the public companies that missed their quota in Q1, for instance, of this year. I don't know if they have a problem that I solve for, but it's a good indicator, leading indicator to me that they might likely be struggling with something that I could solve for with training. So again, this is some type of movement that you've seen, but it's not in relationship to you or your company. They didn't download any of your content, but you're telling based on the signs that they probably are running into a problem that you solve for. And then the last one here is going to be bridge bound based on firmographic. So there is some type of firmographic trigger with them and within the marketplace according to their company. And if you can know what's going on with them there. So great example, companies that went public, if they raised funding, they just acquired another company, they were acquired, they merged with another company, they are in hypergrowth, they moved headquarters, etc. But I would want to know all the triggers that are happening with my prospects. So I'll see a lot of people say like, hey, we just went through IPO and this person didn't even know that. They were selling into me about it. So again, there are degrees of granularity of how much you can know your buyer. So this is one of those degrees. And then the last one is knowing your buyer for your buyer. So this is going to come down to, now I know the metrics for my buyer. I know their common problems and challenges. I know it's statically relevant to them. I know it's relevant in terms of what's happening with them in relationship to my company, and also what's happening to them not in relationship to my company. This last one is going to be knowing my buyer for my buyer in terms of personalization. So I'm not going to go into too heavy here, but personalization is defined as it's one-to-one for someone. So the minute I can send a message to one person, I can send it to Keenan, and then I can also send it to Daniel. It becomes relevance only. So personalization is going to be a great way to pattern interrupt and get a hold of your buyer's attention. There are 6 buckets of personalization that you can use. I'm not going to go in very deep here. If you go into the written section or personalization point within the training hub, I go much deeper into this concept. But there are 6 buckets of personalization that you can personalize to that person in specific, of not what's going on in terms of their metrics and that they care about or in terms of their company, but what's something that they in specific did. So you have bucket number 1, that is self-author content, essentially something that your prospect wrote or authored themselves, a webinar that they were a part of, an article that they wrote, a post that they wrote, or a speaking engagement that they were a part of. Personalization bucket number 2, this is engaged content, anything that they engaged with but didn't author themselves. So they commented on something, they shared something, they liked to comment or they liked to post, but essentially this is something they engaged with but didn't author themselves. Personalization bucket 3 is a profile line, any kind of self-identified traits, things that they wrote about themselves. So profile line, company line, or headline, and you can find all of this data on LinkedIn at a quick glance. This is anything that they wrote about themselves. Bucket number 4 is junk drawer. So this is going to be anything that's non-business related about someone. Personal interests, volunteer experience, languages spoken, schools attended, people they're interested in following. But essentially these are non-business related interests that I always, as a asterisk mark, hook back to what I'm doing as a company. Personalization bucket 5 is background centric. This is going to be anything about their professional background. So tenure at a company, professional trajectory between companies, recommendations given, received, boards that they're on, volunteer experience, awards received, certifications, mutual connections, and skill endorsements. I will say that these buckets are ranked in terms of efficacy. So bucket number 1 is going to be the best. And within the list, in terms of conversion, within the list, the higher up the list you are, the more conversion you should expect to see. So once you start getting down here to mutual connections and skill endorsements, the scalability item comes in and you'll usually see decreased efficacy. And then the last bucket is going to be company level. This is the biggest bucket. This is anything about their company in specific. Hypothetically, this is not personalization, meaning you could send it to multiple people at the company, but it usually will give you some kind of credit. I usually only use this when I don't have any of the other buckets. So company website language, a company post, blog entry, news mention, IPO, funding, but essentially on and on we go. We have 24 variables in total. They made a key hire, but this is personalizing to something that the company did. Usually about 98% of the time, I'm finding something within a higher bucket so I can have increased level of conversion. So in summary, that is it. The 6 things that we reviewed that you should know your buyer according to gain trust with them. Again, trust is defined as they have a firm belief in your ability, the reliability that you'll deliver, the strength of something, or that you're telling the truth. Really, the first 2 are what are knocked out here of how do I know my buyer? So how do I know my buyer according to their metrics that they're metriced on, to the problems or challenges that they commonly face, to what's relevant to them statically in terms of market geo, for instance, what's going on with them in relationship to your company. So like they downloaded content or requested a demo 3 months ago, what's going on with them from a trigger-based perspective, not in relationship to your company. So let's say they IPO'd or just received company funding. And then number 6, knowing them actually for them. So how can I personalize them to convey to them that I know something about them? So all of these combined, I would focus in on one. Again, I'm going to stress it's never too late to start, but this is just the beginning of the wonderful, wonderful journey of getting to know your buyer and having them trust that you can deliver something that they don't have today because of it. So that is everything. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this session and you want to see more just like this, if you go to flipthescript.co, and we have a bunch of different sessions, everything sales from tactical to process to KPI systems on the website, all for free. But either way, I very much so appreciate you tuning in and hope you have a great rest of your day. Watch out.